afternoon and welcome to NASDAQ's webinar for May, Mental Health Awareness Month. Today's webinar is titled Introduction to Wellness Recovery Spaces, What We Know Right Now. I'm Gail Cormier, the Project Director of NASDAQ, the Family Center of Excellence. This presentation will share information on our ever-changing world, and we should be, as well, changing and thinking out of the box. After the pandemic, our world has become increasingly open to addressing mental illness and/or substance use diagnoses more openly. This webinar will discuss concerns and benefits of alternative recovery spaces, how families can support their loved ones, independence in recovery, and the role of peers and how they can play really well in a well-functioning recovery space. Before we start on the presentation today, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with the PowerPoint presentation slides and any additional resources, will be uploaded on our events page after the presentation. We also will be sending you a follow-up email. All attendees will be muted for the presentation portion of today's webinar. However, we still look forward to hearing your questions, and we're happy to help you with any technical issues. To ask a question or request technical assistance, please put your name in the chat and your question, and we'll be watching the entire chat during the presentation. If time allows, we'll unmute and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And please ask as many questions as you can. You can use the raise your hand button. That'll make it easier for us. When you leave this webinar, you'll be redirected to complete a short feedback survey using the link provided. This survey will help us continuously improve our webinars, and it also fulfills our SAMHSA funding obligation to provide them with important data required by our contract. Please note, all information will be confidential, and we will respect your privacy. We do not offer CEU credits for our webinars, but you will receive a certificate of attendance immediately after you fill out the survey. I would like to thank SAMHSA for allowing us to share this information with you today. And again, thank you for joining us. Let's look at this slide. NASDAQ uses family-driven language. We are always trauma responsive. We're strengths-based. We avoid blaming caregivers, a very important one to our whole organization. We're community-driven. We use person-first language. We're always respectful, non-judgmental, and consistent with our actions. Next slide. As we go into the slides, we don't know what the future will bring, but in a recent quote from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., he said the following, and I'll let you read the slide. Addiction isn't just a personal crisis. It's a public health crisis. At Treehouse Recovery in Nashville, I saw firsthand a holistic approach that seeks to heal people physically, mentally, and spiritually, empowering them to build lives of purpose and strength. The future of recovery is a real community, real connection, real hope. RFK Jr. recently said that after he was appointed Health and Human Service Secretary. With this in mind, we're going to think about how to creatively think about the possibilities. This presentation will encourage you to think out of the box. We have two great presenters today that are going to help us do just that and talk about what the possibilities can be to have wonderful communities. So it is now my honor to turn this webinar over to Livia Davis of SPARC and Shireen Caraco, Project Director of Peer Voice, North Carolina. I'll let them introduce themselves and they will tell you a little bit about themselves too. Livia, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Livia Davis. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at C4 Innovations, And I'm also the project director for SPARK, SAMHSA SPARK, which stands for SAMHSA's Program to Advance Recovery Knowledge. And we are here, my colleague Shireen, who will introduce herself in a little bit, we are here to talk about community and recovery community farms or models that may be something for you to consider as you think about recovery. And there has been a lot of attention recently on care farms, as they're called in the US. And we thought we would start with sharing two models that we know of personally. And I'm going to talk about this project called Møltrup, which is in Denmark. I am from Denmark myself, and so I'm an immigrant. I've been here for many years now, but I grew up here, and this is a community, a recovery community that was started by my great-grandfather in 1912. And we thought we would start with some examples that we both have experience with, because we want to make sure that we talk about the importance of values as a starting point as you think about recovery spaces that may be of help to you or to your loved ones. I am calling in from Maine, and I've done a lot of work for about 15 years with people experiencing homelessness prior to coming to C4 Innovations 18 years ago. And I do a lot of training and technical assistance all over the country. And I also do a lot of work on really understanding what are the models out there on recovery care farms, as they're known, or care farms. There are a lot of them in the US, but we're going to start with the ones we have personal experience with in this webinar. All right, so next slide, please. So Møltrup, I'm going to just refer to it as Møltrup. The full name is Møltrup Optagelseshjem, which really means a home that takes you in. And this is a 300-acre community started in 1912. And it's a home first and foremost as much as possible. My great-grandfather was a minister in the Danish prison systems in the 1890s. And he really was struck by the fact that what he learned again and again from the people he worked with in the jails and prison systems and on the street is that they often didn't have a place to return to. They didn't have a home anymore. And they were sharing with him that, you know, nobody cares enough about me to even say the tough things I have to hear, never mind including me in community. And so he established this 300-acre recovery community farm and moved in there with people and his family and 5 children in 1912. And the idea was simple. That as it relates to rules, that the rules are you want to treat each other like you would in a family. Let's not have a lot of official rules, was his belief. He's saying we treat each other as we would want to be treated. Yes, a few rules would be needed, you know, in terms of not actively, you know, drinking, because this was a lot of folks who were dealing with alcohol issue when he first started while there. And that you needed to treat others like you want to be treated. So it was a home, and when you're in a home, you're also interdependent. You're dependent on each other. And so that idea about interdependence is critical to the success. It's also critical to community, right? So it's a home first and foremost. This also means that you can come and stay for as long as you want. And so some people have stayed there till the day that they died. And close by, about 2 miles from there, is a cemetery with more than 150 graves for people who've stayed there till the end of their days. So it's a home first and foremost. There was a big kind of a push to make sure that it stayed a home, is a home. And as you can imagine, as you know, the years went by, there's a lot of pressure to try to make some of these homes or this home into an institution, because a lot of systems that support are designed to support other people like to try to make some of these models home into their shape. And so there's a lot of kind of emphasis on making sure, how do we keep the home-like environment in this place? So next. So one piece of context as well, because we're going to start with values. We're going to talk a lot about values because we think it's such an important place to start when you're thinking about programs or approaches to for your loved ones or yourself when you are contemplating recovery or starting with recovery. So Denmark as a country is part of the European Union, and it has a lot of social rights that it has spelled out, and it's organized around equal opportunities and fair working conditions and social protection and inclusion. So there is a inclusion policy that not only exists in all of Europe, but also exists in Denmark. And so we just kind of, it's important to look at the context because the context in the US would be different. There isn't a specific social inclusion policy in the US. And so those things are important to know when you're thinking about these two European models that you'll hear about today. Again, there's a lot of more work. We could talk about US-based ones, but we have to start with the models that we know about that we want to just share today. So next slide, please. So what are the values at Miltrop? Well, they're all about community and belonging. First and foremost, let's have a place where you belong, where you feel that you can actively participate. What are the things that are normal communal activities in the community in which this program is in? What are the social norms? And so there's a big emphasis on shared meals. There's 3 meals served, everybody eats together. What are the cultural events? What are the economic activities that you can participate, whether it's vocational or whether it's employment, that you can participate in that benefits both you as a person and the community, because again, this is all about interdependence. This is about everybody contributing so that the place can exist. So it's about belonging, and it also is making sure that there's always an emphasis on making sure that any power differential is addressed. So there are staff there are people living there, about 125 people at any given time. And it's really important that that power differential is always attended to. There's a big focus on, serving others or serving the environment, because that also helps you to feel part of the community and take ownership of it. Next, please. There's a big focus on rights and autonomy. So Denmark sees housing and healthcare as a right. We also, on Miltrop, it's all self-referral. We don't get referrals from anywhere else. People come on their own, walk through the gates if that's what they want to do. Because that way we want to make sure that this is something the individual wants to do. The freedom to stay for durations that suit their needs is paramount. And again, there's no imposed minimum or maximum. Next. The interdependence and shared governance is also a big value. Again, we believe that the more interdependent you are, the more groups, smaller groups or networks or civic groups that you're part of, the more independent you actually are. So there's a big emphasis on interdependence as a key strategy to independence. There's a big focus on shared decision-making. And some of it is for the good of the community. Like, are we going to have a second meeting or annual kind of open house? And that's something the whole community would discuss, inviting the public in, or are we going to expand the one we have? Or it could be, of course, that decision-making needs to be between the person who has a recovery plan and the staff that work with them. You also need to make sure that you have systems and structures that can really allow folks to engage or disengage as needed, because we want to make sure there's flexibility and autonomy during your stay there. Next, please. The farm itself is nested within 300 acres of agricultural and forested land. There's a big emphasis on community as a healing agent, but also the environment as a healing agent, and working with animals and plants. There's a lot of emphasis on the healing aspect of that. and the stewardship of that. And so it is just a critical part of it, and something that can be just extremely healing. We've seen that again and again. Next, please. Education is another value that's very important. Collective learning happens in many ways. There is a big emphasis on people who are living there and people from the community coming in and learning together. And this could be from how to cook meals or how to harvest meals to having lecturers come in. There is a big push on making sure that you understand the history of the place. The main buildings are from 1774, and so there's a permanence, a feeling of those buildings and that park and the land has been there for a long, long time. And it's important to preserve the sense of history there. And then the other thing that's really important, because the goal isn't to isolate anyone. It is the opposite, is to create a place where people can rebuild their lives to be part of a community. But the public engagement is critical, and there's very, very regular interaction with the broader community that comes there because it's such a place of healing, and they can either walk in the park, they can buy coffee and pastries, they can go to secondhand store, they can enjoy the natural environment, and also the greater community are employers, and they buy the purchases and the products that are made on the farm. Next, please. So if you look at, what are the elements, you could organize them in many different ways, and you can think about them in the organizing framework that SAMHSA has laid out: the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, health, home, community, and purpose. And so if you look at the elements of the farm in Denmark that's been existing now for 110 years and has survived 2 world wars, it looks something like this. Please go to the next one. There is overarching a daily rhythm that really can be very healing as well. If you come in the first day you're here, you'll see that there are shared meals that always happen at the same time. There is the work day that starts, and there are breaks that starts, but there's also the sense of seasons. There's the sense of, when can I have my free time? When does the public come in? So this kind of daily rhythm can help really soothe some chaotic experiences, is what we heard again and again from people. It's like they can go in and out of this structure as needed to get some stability. So that environment and the structures and the seasons that change, and being part of something larger, and that you can be part of and go in and out of on a daily basis, is something that is an important part of this. Next, please. So some of the ingredients that are key to this model: self-determination, shared decision-making. And it's really clear that, what are the mutual benefits of this place to everyone involved? There are huge elements of interdependence. There's a permanence to it that can be very soothing, and that just feels like it's something that has been around for a long time, that it doesn't need to boast. It doesn't need to do anything other than be there as a community. People are seen, as all having gifts that can contribute to the good, not only of their own lives, but of the community. And there's a lot of peer-to-peer work, peer-to-staff interactions, and peer-to-public. So when the public come in, they're most often greeted by people who live there, not necessarily by staff, so that there's the real hosting into the community of the people who live there. Next. You all, again, have shared meals. It's really important that you have service to others. You want to care for those common resources and spaces. That's another big piece that people take great pride in. There's collective learning. There's also a spiritual invitation here and on this farm, whatever that may look like, the higher power, whatever that might be, or if you think that being in nature is helpful, all of those things are encouraged. Hosting the public, meaningful day activities, whether you're being trained or whether you're working or whether you're handling the cows, or you're out in the community on a work share, whatever it is. You have some meaningful day activities, you have income generating activities, so the place is self-sufficient, you have structure, and you have nature. Next, please. The community partnerships are vital. So a lot of the firms that are in the surrounding towns, they contract with the farm for specific product preparation. You can see there's a whole wood factory here. It's completely self-reliant. It has its own electricity and its own heat, all from its own resources, either solar or wind power or from burning hay. Next slide, please. It does a lot in hosting the public, and that's so that it's not isolated, and also knowing that the public can benefit as much from this space as anyone living there. So there's a real kind of emphasis on hosting. Next. There's also a lot of high-end product development. So you can see that there are some shelves here with food items. That is food that is prepared by the farm, on the farm, and they anything from dairy products to meat products to anything made from harvesting or berries. There's also a commercial kitchen where you can come in to learn how to cook, and you have whole classes there. And again, it's hosting the public and the people who are maybe in training to want to go for a job. Next. So service to others includes the land, animals, the public, each other, and common resources. And it's there's a lot of common resources, and it's includes 300 acres. Next. And we know from anecdotally that having others depend on you can be a powerful opportunity to gain independence, right? And so whether it's animals or plants, there's something about having other people depending you that really helps. Now, Miltrop has decided, that they haven't done any research to show that the model works. They have basically said, well, we have 110 years of work and outcomes and stories, and we know it works, right? And so this is one of these really strong beliefs that they have that, if you give somebody trust and responsibility, they're going to grow, right? And they've seen that again and again in folks as they benefit from the farm. Next. And then, lastly, this idea about permanence is also really evident in the local cemetery. So this is the grave from my great-grandfather, the founder, but all around, that part of the cemetery are the sons of Miltrop. And Miltrop serves men only, but 125 live there at any given time, and thousands have gone through the program in the 110 years. And so leaning on that permanence and learning from it, and always looking at, what can we learn from the people who are coming in? What gifts do they have that they can help the common good, the common resources in addition to themselves is a huge piece. And that permanence also means that we have a lot of data from annual reports and stories that we can rely on to really keep saying that this works. So this is one model that I have very personal experience with, having lived there and having been part of my family for a long time. There's a lot of lessons learned about what not to do as well that we can share or talk about if there is more time. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Shireen.
Thank you so much, Livia. Hello, everybody. It's great to have so many people from around the country with us today, talking about some of these international examples. And I just want to uplift something Livia said, which is there are some really great things that are happening in the United States as well. And so we don't want to discount that. We just want to share some of the things that we know that's happening around the world that are really great examples for us to consider as we are continuing to pursue recovery here in the U.S. My name is Shireen Carrico. I am a psychiatric survivor. I came into mental health services when I was, around 12, 13 years of age. So maybe not unlike some of the young people that you serve or some of the young people that your family's of. I came in at a young age, really trying to understand what was going on with my emotional health, my mental health, and my well-being. And fast forward, I've worked in this field for 32 years now, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to work internationally, to work around the country, and see some of the best things that our country has to offer, and some things that I would say, oh, we need some work here. But at this point, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am the CEO of a completely standalone peer-run organization called Promise Resource Network in North Carolina. And we are operating close to 25 programs at this point. So we do a lot of work with a lot of people around our state, usually in non-traditional alternative spaces. So I wanted to join this dialogue today because back in November, I had the wonderful opportunity of going to a place called Trieste, Italy. And if you look it up, please feel free to Google it. You're going to see a lot of information. But Trieste, Italy is dubbed the best place in the world to have mental illness. As somebody who has 9 mental health diagnoses, I will tell you that I was skeptical because a lot of places say that they have figured it out. They have words like recovery and rehabilitation and all these words in their mission statements. But when it comes to actually operationalizing it, it can fall very flat. So I'm going to be transparent and say I went to Trieste as a skeptic. I came back as a believer, a reformed believer in how systems can truly be transformed to support people like myself to move forward in their lives. So we're going to talk a little bit about Trieste. So I was a part of a group of 20 people. It was curated by this organization called Heart Forward, which is out of California. And we called ourselves the Equipe. These 20 folks were from all different backgrounds. We had policymakers at the federal level. We had occupational therapists there, psychiatrists were there, researchers, but it was a very carefully curated group of people coming together to examine how they have operationalized recovery in Trieste, Italy. And we wanted to examine similarities and differences between the US system and the Italian system and kind of learn some lessons to figure out, is it possible to do some sort of replication or to infuse what we do in the United States with some of the lessons that they've learned in Italy? This is our mission. As I said, it was an intentionally curated group, and we are committed to advancing a more human and holistic mental health care system here in the US. We reject the institutional status quo, which often contributes to suffering, houselessness, or homelessness and incarceration in the US. And so we really did look abroad to find some of those bright spots to figure out what can inform sustainable change here in the US. So a couple things about Trieste that make it very, very interesting. It was founded in 1968 by actually a psychiatrist, and his name is Franco Basaglia. Franco Basaglia was a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a very, very strong advocate for disability rights. He was one of these folks. He worked in a psychiatric hospital, and he was completely appalled by what he experienced as a psychiatrist in that system, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute. But a lot of the staff, including himself, had been incarcerated in Italy due to their activities around anti-fascism, and they found a lot of similarities between their carceral experience and those of psychiatric hospitals and the people that live in psychiatric hospitals. So what they wanted to do was to liberate, rehumanize, empower, and figure out, how do we create communities that heal? One of the central themes was they wanted to shut down psychiatric hospitals. They wanted to really build community. And above all, they wanted to liberate people from hierarchy, from paternalism, from structural control and social control that they experienced as providers in the psychiatric system, in the treatment community, and as psychiatrists. And it took them over 10 years, but during that time, they really reformed the mental health space in Trieste. They obtained legal, financial, and political support, and they figured out how to develop their practices based on shared values and how to create a systemic change, which is what I had the pleasure of walking into when I went in November. You're going to see some pictures from my trip along the way as well, just to kind of give it some presence. So as Livia said, we can't start talking about what it is and how they did it until we truly understand the paradigm. And I will say, when we look at what's happened in Denmark, I look at what's happened in Italy, when I look at some of the great practices in the United States, one of the things that they have in common is very strong values. And the values aren't just on a piece of paper. They are actually operationalized in policy, in practice change, in the way the systems are designed, how they are funded, but they are very much rooted in their values. In Trieste, very similar to in Denmark, their values are rooted in humanity, recovery, community, and there is a very strong anti-oppression and human rights-centered focus. When I take a look at it and map out what their values are, they really center around these 5 buckets. The first one I read and my jaw hit the ground. And not only did I see these things on paper, I heard it in the language, I saw these things in the space, and most importantly, I saw them in the interactions between people that were providing services and people that were utilizing services for the week that I was in Italy. So the first one that blew me away is that we help the person, we don't treat an illness. They believe in this so much that they don't even use diagnostic language or symptom-centered perspectives when they are working with people. So that whole medicalization of what we call mental illness does not exist in their space because they believe that they are developing a relationship with the person. They are not treating a diagnosis. They are not treating a series of symptoms, and they are not treating labels. The second one is they do everything that they can to support and foster social connectedness, inclusion, and recovery. You will see, I will share with you maybe 4 different examples, not all inclusive, but 4 different examples of how they went about doing this reform effort. And you will see the promotion of recovery and inclusion in everything that they've done. The third one is that they do the things that matter the most to people. So regardless of their clinical opinion, their training, their professional vantage point, their whole focus is on the person and make sure that they have what they want, the support, the resources and knowledge, whatever the case may be. Oftentimes, these are practical things like basic needs. They believe that housing is a right, for example. They believe that voting is a right, for example. And so they do center on those basic practical things, but everything is done around the things that matter most to the people that are receiving supports. The other one was a really interesting one to see in practice, which is instead of trying to push people into the community, they recognize that the awareness and the knowledge and the connectedness of the community has got to be shifted in order for people to live in community. So they do a lot of things with their neighbors, for their neighbors, bringing community in, bringing people into community, and creating new imaginations of what community looks like. So it's not an outing, for example. People that are receiving supports in Trieste are part of the fabric of the community, and in interesting ways, they actually make the community run, which I'll share with you in a couple of minutes. And then the last one was very prevalent, and it was reinforced over and over and over. Everybody is a citizen with rights first and foremost. And any attempt to remove rights, use social control, use hierarchy or power imbalance is not only minimized, but attempts are made to eliminate any approach that would be experienced as oppressive for the people that are receiving services. So the Passaglia law is Law 180, and it is the Italian Mental Health Act of 1978 is when it passed. And these are the 4 bullets. It's freedom and dignity of the person with being a full citizen with full citizenship rights. That housing is a right Work is a right and voting is a right, and they take these things very, very seriously. When they were transforming the services, the systems, and promoting rights, they focused on a few different things. The first one was really combating stigma, discrimination, and promoting the human rights and the recovery. The second one is to build a life in community. That is not just a temporary life. It is that the service side is temporary. Anything that would be confined is very, very temporary in Italy because we live our lives in the community and in support of a civil society. We are all needed to make society work. In order to do that, they created their entire system is community-based, non-carceral, non-confined, non-hospital based. So much so that their hospitals, for a population of 350,000 people that they serve, they have 6 hospital beds. And you heard me right, 6 hospital beds. They are unlocked. They do not do forced treatment in Italy, or they try to prevent it if at all possible, because most everything they offer is completely community-based, and then everything they do is respect of promotion of human rights. And then the last thing is they focus a lot on national policies and legislation in line with what's called CRPD. CRPD stands for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and then they do a lot with the World Health Organization and the International Human Rights Standards. So they use these standards to really guide the design of their community-based system. So I'll share with you just 4 examples. It's not all exhaustive, but 4 that really struck me in being in Italy. The first one is they utilize what they call individualized health budgets, which basically means that Shireen would come into the system with her own budget. And with that budget, I am co-designing or co-creating how that budget is being utilized, along with some of the other supports, the people that I choose to be a support, but we choose together how my money is spent. And that is inclusive of a variety of different things from home to employment, job opportunities, mentorship, services that I receive, but I can pick and choose how my budget is utilized. It was a very interesting thing to see. Probably one of the closest that we have in the US would be the money follows the person, but it doesn't go nearly as strong in the direction of what these personal budgets look like in Italy. The second thing that they did is they opened community mental health centers. Now, the interesting thing about these community health centers is they are in very accessible locations. So they have multiple throughout one community, and there's no wrong door. So anybody can walk into any of their community mental health centers. They are not medical. So I know we have a push for things like CCBHC here in the US. This is more like, if you've been doing this a long time like I have, think about the old community centers. Or if you've gone to college and you had the community centers in the middle of college campus, they're more designed like that. There are a variety of things going on in that space, in those spaces. They're active, they have activities, they have classes, they have educational opportunities going on. They are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is completely walk-in space. In these community mental health centers, they also have a pharmacy, which was really like a room with a whole bunch of meds sitting in this room. So again, I go back to my early days of working in this system. It reminded me of that. They have psychiatrists and outpatient services there. The psychiatrists were one of the most fascinating part of this for me because their psychiatrists are actually community-based. So people don't have to come to meet with a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is in people's homes. They are in the community. They're all over the place. But they also have space in these community mental health. And then they have all their community teams work out of these community health centers. It was really quite remarkable to see how the CCM HCs were designed. The next one, which is the third one that I want to share, is something called open dialogue. If we were to turn open dialogue into an approach or a model, this is the definition. Open dialogue is really based on dialogue. It's a dialogical approach that brings together social networks, and it supports people to make meaning out of their distress, which means that they do not pathologize and call it illness or view people through the lens of illness, symptoms, diagnoses, or anything like that. What it does is support the person to explore their identity and their experiences rather than trying to medicate it, or to hospitalize somebody based on this illness or based on symptoms. They want to support people to uplift their quality of life and their voice. Being in Italy, when we were asking, the US folks were asking a lot of questions, as you can imagine. And one of the things that they were asking is, so what are the best practices that they use? And they had a hard time finding a language because, as Carrie Morrison, who is in this picture, would say, it is not an approach that they do or something they do to somebody. It's the water that they live in. So they can't even, it can be difficult for them to even explain it or describe it because it's literally how they interact with people and how they establish relationships. These are some examples of how open dialogue is used in Trieste. The first one, which was really a stunning thing to see, is that everybody that is connected to the person knows the person. And I don't mean knows their diagnosis, knows their labels, know their symptoms, or knows their psychiatric medications. They know people. If I were to ask the psychiatrist what somebody's favorite meal was, somebody's favorite color was, what they enjoy doing, the psychiatrist knows those things because they are truly in relationship with people. Their psychiatrists operated more like really good social workers than psychiatrists. As a matter of fact, they were giving us a lot of cautionary tales about the use of labels, diagnostics, and psychiatric medications. It's very evident in how they talk, how they view the community and people, and how they work with people. The psychiatrists, they are communities. So they work in people's homes. Every morning they call the local hospitals and see if anybody came into the hospital, and then they go right over there and start establishing a relationship to get the person out of the hospital. Remember, they do not believe in confinement is a treatment. They actually believe that that is oppression. And so they're doing everything they can to support the person to live and be and work in their community. And then they have the offices in the mental health center. The meetings that occur with people, really, I was saying to Livia, it was interesting. They believe really strongly that you can't make a decision as a practitioner and a person receiving services as a duo, because that two-person relationship could lead to power over and hierarchy, where that practitioner might misuse, even unintentionally, might misuse power to coerce or push the person into decision making. And so meetings with the person are with the person and their trusted folks. So it will not be, for example, between the person and their psychiatrist. It might be between the person, the psychiatrist, and a neighbor, if they choose, or the person, a psychiatrist, and a mentor, person, psychiatrist, and a friend. So it really, they operate through triads, not through dyads, to avoid the power over relationships. And as a result of all of this, I saw it firsthand. People trust their service providers. It was like we were speaking a different language when we were asking questions about the relationship between their service providers. They call the hospital staff just to talk, like it was a phone line, just to say, what are you doing? And this is what I'm up to. Their psychiatrists are viewed as allies, and they're viewed as their champions. And they operate, as I said, like really good social workers. That whole tension that we see in the US of compliance is not existing. If you listen to their workers, their practitioners, they would say it's because we're not trying to get anybody to do anything. We're not trying to coerce or have anybody's solutions. We are trying to support people to come up with their own life and their own solutions. So it was a very interesting thing to see. The last couple of things that I'll share is they have what they call social co-ops. And these social co-ops are legally recognized organizations, and they are in the business of making the community run. And so they provide employment through a variety of different businesses in their communities. And they use a lot of apprentices for workforce development. A lot of the folks that are employed that receive services might decide to work at one of their social co-ops. They're managed by the business owner, the people that have worked there, along with the people in the community with lived experience, and all have shared power and decision making. This is the reason why, and the image on the left is really important. They felt like people were working without receiving income, nor the recognition of their rights. And so they were working for free. It's called ergotherapy. And that is a version of where treatment feels like work is a part of the cure, but you can work without all of the rights in the social contract and the relationship, including money. And so they deem that exploitation. They do not do anything that would be exploitive. And so their workers are salaried, and they call it from being interned patients to salary workers, and creating real economic opportunities. If you're interested in looking up their social co-ops, this is just a short list. They have one that's devoted for young people that create short films and documentaries. They have one around tourism. They have an IT and digital solutions social co-op, green space maintenance, all of these different things where people have the opportunity to work if they choose. And their outcomes speak for themselves. They have decreased their suicide rates by 40%. They have closed down their psychiatric hospitals. They have decreased costs while increasing employment. They have brought homelessness down to zero, and they have created an integrated system that is truly designed around home health, healing, and quality of life. If you are interested, I have a link here. And then we're going to add Livia back to this conversation because we have a couple of questions for you to mull on.
Thank you so much, Shireen. So a lot for all of you to think about for these two models, right? And I do want to say, and I did put a link in the chat as well. There are recovery community farms, care farms in the U.S. as well. The link I provided is a great place to start, but there are others that are not on the list, and part of that is because, you know, what's in the name? Are we calling them care farms? Are we calling them recovery communities? Are we calling them, you know, something different? And what do we mean when we say recovery care farm? Because if you look at the care farm and network link that I gave you, and you start going through that, you'll see that there are a lot of different models with different elements. So some have a residential component. Some do not. It's only during the day you come in. Some offer, you know, equestrian, animal therapy, and it's just during the day. Some do it for a specific purpose, grief, or to help veterans with post-traumatic stress, for example. Others are doing it as a pathway to recovery. You know, some have a strong emphasis of saying, you know, let's have a whole social purpose enterprise where we are making, you know, and selling products where, you know, that are, you know, sought after by the community, but it's during the day. Others are for people with developmental disabilities, and intellectual disabilities. And so all of those different models may have slightly different configuration of elements. And so it's important to think about, as you consider this, you know, what are some of the elements that would be important to you? So for your consideration, we want to think about a couple of things and just talk some of that through with you to see if you have any questions. So we led with values. So we would want you to consider asking about and discussing the values of any program that is being considered as a recovery support, a pathway for your loved one or loved ones, right? So, you know, because you want to think about that. What is it that's important, and how can you best find that out? And sometimes that's just by asking them straight out, right? But it's also something you can do if you go visit, because as Shireen was saying, you can sometimes see the values in action, right? It's not just enough to have it on paper. You want to see, what does it look like if you go and visit, right? So Shireen, you want to take the first question?
So here was part of it is us writing it out. There are a lot of things that call themselves the same model or same approach, but when you look at each of them, they vary greatly. But one of the things that we know that communities that do these things well, models, approaches, programs, or like in Trieste, that there are some shared values in order to do this well. And so we wanted you to consider asking about when you ask us in the chat, and discuss any of the values of the programs that are being considered as recovery support pathway for your loved ones. Can you see those values in action? Are they simply on a piece of paper, but when you are impacted by that organization, or you go to visit, or you're receiving supports and services, are they actually operationalizing it? And if so, what does that look like? What are those values that you feel like are absolute pinnacles of doing different type of approaches well, that are very similar to what you saw at the Healing Farm in Denmark or in Trieste? The second one is it important for you to consider different models that include peer-based recovery support services, including to young people directly, so youth peer-to-peer support, as well as to family members? Do you feel like that's a critical component to you? I will say that in Trieste, that part of this was not as well developed as we have in the US, and they have a lot to learn from us. And I met with several of their peer supporters while I was there, which was really great to see. It is one of those areas that as they evolve their system, they are actually growing their peer-to-peer support and their family support piece of it. So is that important to you, that it includes that when you're considering some programs? The third one is the program rooted in rights and community. Are things actually being mandated? What is being mandated in the program and why? What is really a choice and what is not? In Trieste, pretty much nothing is mandated. The use of psychotropic medications are absolutely optional, and they are a tool, but they are one tool that is not required. There are very few things that would be mandated, and if they were to use involuntary commitment, for example, there are 3 different levels that somebody goes through to make sure that it is not a power over and their rights are being honored and preserved. So is that important when we look at different models or different examples in the US? What is being mandated? What is a choice? Is the program truly rooted in rights and community? Livia, you want to do the next 2?
Sure. The other thing that is a good idea to ask about is, what are some of the outcomes that the program can share with you, right? And it could be that they track very specific outcomes because they have a funder that looks for specific outcomes. Or it could be that just by being there and talking to people, you get a sense of, how is this having an impact? How is this something that is, a right fit for somebody? What are the things they're getting out of it for their own lives, right? So what outcomes can the programs share with you? Or are there folks who can talk to you about having gone through the program? That's something that you might want to consider as well. And then, best practices, evidence-based or evidence-informed practices, what are they using? Are they using, peer support? For example, the farm in Denmark, Møltrup, they also don't understand the whole peer workforce as we do in the US. And so they have a lot to learn and they're very interested. What does that mean? Because having a family, a parent provider or peer support provider is an evidence-based practice, right? And so how can that be added to the program? So you want to think about that. They using motivational interviewing? Are they do they have a track record? Like the Miltrop has 100 years of data, and so it's practice-based.
Yeah.
And we also know that there is research that shows that in nature and animal interaction is a healing agent. It can really improve outcomes for people with serious mental health issues, right? And so think about that also, because you want to make sure that you are finding a program that is grounded in good practice. Just as with any model, there are sometimes programs that run really well, and there's sometimes some programs that are still emerging and that still have some work to do to get to the place where they need to be. And then you want to think about, again, what elements are must-have for you or your loved one, right? What is really important, so that you have a sense of that as you consider some of these programs. All right, you want to go to the next slide? Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Well, the next one is actually from Dr. William Anthony, who was the founder of psychiatric rehabilitation. And I read this article many, many, many years ago, and it really struck me, because what he was saying related to evidence-based practices is what happens is we focus so much on the practice and we translate them in fidelity tools that say, are you doing this technically correct, basically? Do you have this level of staffing? Or do you have that level of training? All of those things typically get translated into what something that is called an evidence-based practices. But his argument is you can have a practice that is technically absolutely correct based on fidelity, and you're not going to get the outcomes, because it's less about the practice and it's more about the process. That the secret sauce and what makes something effective is the process. And to him, the process was about the exchange. It was about the relationship, not the technical ingredients. And so it wasn't even so much about what is being done at a program or a model. It is important to understand how to do it well to be effective. And that's what he would call evidence-based process. I will tell you, in all the programs in all the countries and all the states that I've worked with, I have seen this over and over and over again, that the secret ingredient is the relationships, not so secret, but it's the relationships between people that work there and people that receive supports that make the difference, and what those relationships look like, which is the next one. Relationships are absolutely key to healing and based on earned trust, which only happens in authentic interactions. So when you're looking at different models to replicate, when you're looking at programs that you're considering for yourself or your families, think about how the relationship is being fostered in the program you're considering. Are there real relationships, or is it really more about the tasks that are being done? You have a case manager, you have a person receives services, the case managers are making referrals and they're connecting people to services, but they don't really know people. They're not in relationship. Something to consider when you're thinking about this. I said to Livia, the relationships, authentic relationships, there is no Cliff Note version of it. You have to earn trust and earn respect. It's not going to come because of your education or your licensure or the title that you have. It is something that has to be earned both ways over and over and over again. The next one, which is a really important one to us at Promise Resource Network as a peer-run organization, is, are we supporting people to explore who they are as a human being, not connected to labels? So not connected to a diagnosis. My name is Shireen and I'm bipolar, I'm schizophrenic. Oftentimes those of us who are service recipients come into these systems and our language becomes shaped by the very system. And before you know it, our identity is wrapped into the labels. And that is a small identity. It reduces us down to nothing more than our diagnosis, or for some of us, many diagnoses in order to really build a life and to recover and to heal and find a life full of wellness. What we find is we have to figure out who we are, not centered in what it's called or what is wrong with us, which is oftentimes what happens. It's all about our behavior and changing our behavior. We have to have opportunities to identify who we are and explore those identities in safe relationships. So does the program offer pathways to figure out who you are beyond symptoms and reclaim or maybe even claim my sense of self for the first time? I'm no longer just a mental patient. I'm no longer an addict. I'm no longer a felon. I'm no longer the homeless. I'm a homeowner. I'm a worker. I'm a student. It's about building a life that is not a treatment-centered life. Do you want to do the last two, Livia?
Sure. One word about the relationships too that Shireen and I were discussing. So in the 1940s, a gentleman named William Beveridge in United Kingdom developed a report, and he basically laid the groundwork for many of our systems. And he basically believed that human beings are not very good at subjectively helping others and knowing how to do that in a good way. So he designed systems that were very objective, that basically said, we don't want to center relationship building in our systems to help each other. And so we are still living with that legacy today. Many of us, were designed to not share the mutuality between a practitioner and a service recipient, right? So as a social worker, I was trained not to share my story. And so those systems are still impacting us. And so when you're looking at some of these alternative spaces, what they sometimes get really right is that they understand that that relationship is key, and they're designing around the community and the connectedness and the relationship because, we all need that, right? So just wanted to mention that again, that it's not an accident that sometimes our systems feel cold or objective, not all of them, but, that was by design almost 100 years ago. So on the farm in Denmark, there are many joyful activities, and people also get to go on vacations. And I think so much of what we've learned is that, life can be hard. Let's be sure that we take time to be joyful, right? And not always be serious. And how do we do that? How do we invite music and culture and fun activities into programming to help with that? It's such an important piece of this. And so you might want to think about that when you're looking at spaces or looking to replicate programming. And then lastly, just to kind of turn back again, you want to always think about the values first and foremost and get a sense of that, because that will impact everything else that comes afterwards. Shireen, anything else you want to add to these two?
I do want to underscore something you said about the relationship. So in a recovery community, we talk a lot about really unpacking and deconstructing the notion of being a helper. Because in that notion of a relationship, I'm already coming into that relationship then with some power. I have knowledge, I have wisdom that I am going to impart to you. When you identify yourself as a helper, the risk is that there is a hierarchy that I know what's best, or that I'm getting my needs met. My ego needs met out of my relationship with you as the helpee. And there's some distinct disadvantages to always being a helper, and there's distinct advantages to always being a helper, and there's distinct disadvantages to always being a helpee. It can feel very powerless. And there's some distinct advantages of always being a helpie. And so in that relationship, what we are trying to do is examine what mutuality really looks like so that we are truly in relationship with one another. I saw that play out in the relationship between the psychiatrists and the people that were receiving psychiatric services in Trieste every single day. They didn't go into it thinking I have your answers. It was actually quite the opposite, but they were also not in you wouldn't be able to tell that it was a professional and a service recipient that were talking to each other. You would have thought it was two family members or two friends that were in relationship, because they have really figured out how to deconstruct the idea of being a helper. So we wanted to see what questions that you all have. Please feel free to put them in the chat and we will be happy to answer. Good.
Hi guys, let me jump in real quick. Shireen, if you could take your slides down. We want everyone to, if you feel comfortable, to put on your cameras, ask us questions. I think the questions that I saw in the chat were already answered, but raise your hand if you know how to go to your reactions and raise your hand to ask questions of these ladies. And what are your thoughts around some of the concepts that have been taught here today? I said the one thing that I put in the chat was I really love the fact where you said making meaning out of one's distress. I think that is so powerful for people to be able to find what is happening with them in a way that they're not diagnosed. Okay, so I see Julie has her hand up. Julie, take your microphone off and let's hear your question.
Hi there, thank you so much. This was a lovely, beautiful presentation. And I appreciate how much is being done outside of the US for people. I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but here's I'm going to give you my high level. There are wonderful places already in the US, but they're all private pay. We have good programs, but they depend on what state that you live in. We're at a point right now where until we can talk about nationalizing health the way these other countries have, and of course we're multiple times larger than Denmark, to give you an example, we need nationalized health. It concerns me when Secretary Kennedy talks about this farm that he went to heal himself. That's great. I'm sure he had lots of money to pay for it. But those of us who have loved ones who are in desperate need of inpatient care, not a hospital, but a facilitated care of this kind, we can't afford it. And there's nothing on the horizon that I see except maybe taking away the mental health resources he already has. So I don't really want to come off sounding so negative, but if this can be a discussion on how we as Americans get to that point, that would make me very happy. Thank you.
Can I share a couple things with you, Julia? Because I don't think
Please.
you're being negative at all. I think this is the realism that is bringing us to look at what's happening outside of the US and try to figure out what needs to change, what can change. How do you create systemic change and not just these disparate programs? And so I think you're absolutely spot on. I don't feel like that's being negative at all. I can tell you one of the things that we are doing right now in one of our cities in North Carolina is we are examining what made Trieste model work, like all of those ingredients, and funding is a huge piece of it. And we're taking that, we're trying to translate that into how do you create that as a US city, a US community? Because if accessibility, if the ability to pay, all of the barriers around access in terms of referrals, and you need to have a diagnostic assessment, and you need this type of insurance. If we continue to approach it in that way, there will always be haves and have-nots. As a matter of fact, at PRN, at my organization, one of the designs from the beginning when I started the agency 20 years ago is that everything we do is open access, regardless of anybody's ability to pay, where they come from. So even our hospital alternatives, we operate several alternative to emergency departments and inpatient settings. They are not insurance centered. They're not diagnostic and centered, and they are not referral based. People have access to the things that they want to have access to. We can absolutely do this in the US. We actually can leverage Medicaid to do it as one source of funding, but my cautionary tale is always Medicaid, if it's done in the way it's being done right now, is going to default to medicalization and clinicalization. The question is not whether Medicaid should fund these alternatives, it's how do we leverage it to fund them without co-opting them, is a better question in my estimation. But then you leverage Medicaid, but you also have a variety of other financial sources for anybody. So it's something doesn't exist just for somebody with Medicaid, for example, or something exists just for somebody with private pay. It is an and, it's not an or. It requires a lot of policy people, but even more than that, political will for us to figure out how do we do these things in the United States and make them work. We don't lack for resources, but we have to look at where we are putting our resources and how we are continuing to get exactly what we're paying for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for your question, Julia. I see, Corey, did you want to respond, Julia, before we move on? Okay. thanks.
No, I'm fine. You know, I could chit chat on this forever, but
Understood.
I'm fine.
Understood.
I'm just going to say my son lives in Charlotte. So next time I'm in the area, I'll be giving you a call. Thank you.
Awesome. Corey, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to take off your microphone and ask your question.
Yes, hi. I fell in love and I'm trying to figure out how much I need to move. That's the first thing. No, this was so beautiful in so many ways, and I'm encouraged, but how do we do it? How do we do it here? Because we need it. I see people every day, they want to go get help, but they're going to lose their home, or they're going to lose their car or their children, so it's like, it's just easier for me to just get high again and forget about it and not have to worry about it and not think about it. And it's sad, I love so many parts of what you said. I wrote so much stuff down, and I know I'm going to look at it later and be like, what does this mean? But I loved how you said, that the psychiatrists were part of the community. Do you know how hard it is to get an appointment with a psychiatrist? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? The fact that they know your name, the fact that they know your favorite color. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to say it. My brother just passed. We're having his funeral on Sunday. We didn't know what his favorite color was. I called his daughter and she said, I don't know. I called his ex-wife and she said, I don't know. He was a music person and he loved music, but we just get tied up in so much of the daily rigmarole that we forget about relationships. And that is the key. So I don't know. I loved everything that you said. I'm going to visit. I may not move, but I am definitely going to visit. It's amazing. And then you said, that so many of the people that worked there had been incarcerated, and incarceration is like that's my thing. I don't know, but we don't have it right here. And how do we get it right? Let me know. When you find out, let me know, because I'm there.
And Corey, thank you so much for sharing, because yes, it's very powerful what they're doing in these other countries. But I think that Shireen is definitely onto something here.
How did you find out about this, Shireen? What got you into?
Yeah, I've heard about Trieste for a long time, because in the mental health space, it's well known as the example around the world that if you're going to create a mental health system, that's the one to do it. To do it after. And so I knew about Trieste, but I'd never been there. And I was reached out to. I was reached out to have an invitation and be a part of this group of 20. And they chose people that they felt like could do what you're saying, Corey, that they were people that were activators, that either were in positional situations where they could inform change. They were disruptors and could really push for the change. They were policy makers. And so the group was very intentionally put together. That group is now working for a year up to after our Italy trip. And this is what we're strategizing around. What do we do? Now that you know this information, you've seen it, we can't use the explanation that it can't be done. I agree that they have some ingredients that are different there. They have universal health care. But that in and of itself should not be where we say, well, just sorry, we can't do it here. We need the Corys, and we need the Julias, and we need the Livias, and we need the Lachelles, and the Shireens, and the Pennies, and the Lauras, and everybody else that's in here who are willing to step into that really complex situation and figure out not what do we need to do, but how do we make this a reality in the US? You know, I'll just end with this. When I started PRN, it was the first standalone PRN organization in our state. I didn't have permission. I did it because I knew if I waited for permission, I'd still be waiting in our state. So we had to take on the responsibility of figuring out how to make it work, not only in the US, but in a southern state. And we've done it without any insurance, without Medicaid funding. We have figured out how to make these non-traditional alternatives exist. We can make it happen. Go ahead, Livia, now that I've dominated my answer.
Yeah, no, what I want to say, Corey, is that there are some foundations here to build on, right? So in the last 25 years, I've been very involved with the recovery community in the US, right? Because I'm an immigrant, I live here. And I didn't know about the recovery community the way it exists in the US. And if you think about how recovery has exploded, both in terms of the peer workforce, but also in terms of recovery community organizations, and the kernel of what that means, so much of that work is part of the elements that you see in the two models that we shared, right? And so my hope is to, just from my role in any way I can, is how do we work with the recovery community, people who are interested, to say, hey, how can we think about maybe you extending what you do into a different setting? Because we've said, recovery support, so family support belongs everywhere, in every setting, right? We've said that. So one to start could be in these settings, right? So there's a lot to build on here. I think, we do have to just get creative, but we also have to look at how do we use what we have and try to organize that and figure out specific strategies that we can then suggest to each other, but also to funders, because there's a lot to work here, and it's the recovery community that has done it. And that's where the secret sauce is.
Yeah, and to add one more thing,
Thank
and
you.
how do we scale the things that we have in the US so that it's not what Julia said, like you have these disparate communities that are private pay, that are doing really great pockets of amazing things, but it never takes on as the way we do the work on a US-based scale. So the other question is, how do we identify those beautiful things that are happening and they're being done well in the US, and how do we work to scale them with quality and integrity?
Yeah. And so I wanted to say what Marcia said in the comments. She said, here in this country, we have classes of people, hundreds of years of that business. Until we think of all humans as equal, I am on a mission to love my community and even yours. My mission is love. And there were people who responded in the chat saying, yes, of like, it's, that was one of the reasons we wanted to present this to you guys, to think out the box of how things are changing in our world. They're changing drastically. And we have to think about real life situations that have worked. Like Livia said, they have hundreds of years of data that this is effective. Shireen knows this is effective. Shireen, like she said, she didn't ask the questions, and sometimes, you know, you have to do those things, right? Because if she wouldn't ask the question, she would not be able to have her respite centers and to do the work that she's doing, probably nationally, I believe, right, Shireen?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? We probably have about 2 more minutes for questions before we do a wrap up. So if you can put your hand up, or you could turn off your speaker, turn on your speaker and ask a question.
So I see one from Eduardo Lachelle, and I think one of the genius strategies of getting away from labels is having organizations of all kinds committing to have people with lived experience in leadership positions. And I am hopeful in some of the movement I've seen in that area as well, and would love to see more companies of all shapes and sizes make that commitment. Because there is nothing more powerful than a person with lived experience in a leadership position in terms of busting labels from a platform of power, right? Because we do like our leaders in this country, right? And so any way you can use that in that role. That's one specific strategy I've seen. Obviously, there's all kinds of other strategies, but that's one I wanted to uplift because it's also a personal mission of C4 Innovations where I work.
Absolutely.
I would add, we give it less value, right? So like if I were to come and receive treatment from your organization, which diagnosis are you going to treat me for? Which one's relevant? Diagnosis 1, 7, 5, 8, right? A long time ago, I stopped giving any credence to the diagnostics that I was given. And as an organization, we don't ask diagnostic-based language. We don't care about any assessments. We don't reinforce that language. It was never our language to begin with. It was a language that was handed to us, but it never belonged to us. So now we deny it as our own. We might have these labels, and in different spaces they might have to be put out there, but we don't operate like that from an organizational perspective with a lot of intentionality. So I think part of the way we do that, Eduardo, is to focus on what your experience is, not what it's called. I want to know much more about what you're experiencing in your life than what it was labeled as, because the labels are just, frankly, it's irrelevant to me.
I agree. And also thinking about when we talk about lived experience with mental health and substance use is across the board. It doesn't have a discrimination. It hits everyone, if that makes sense. So I think we have to think about funding in different ways as well with corporations. I'm talking like Spectrum or whoever your internet carrier are. There are organizations that are not nonprofit. And I think with what we're going through, we have to start thinking out the box about what actually works and where else we get funding from. So just a thought. So ladies, do you have any last remarks you would like to say before we wrap up our webinar today?
I just want to acknowledge that there are questions, comments, concerns about, what are some of the challenges, or what should we look out for? And we are compiling a list of that to share as well, because I think that's important, again, to normalize. Yes, if you have questions or concerns, let's get them all collated. Let's figure out what are some ways to think about making recommendations to overcome those questions and concerns. Yep.
Right. Some strategy sessions would be really helpful. So if we have people in this audience that really want to figure out how do we uplift this, I think there's a lot of strategy that has to be surrounded by it. Do we influence policy? Do we influence funding? Is it at the federal level? Is it at the state level, the local level? I think there's a lot of considerations when we're thinking about that. My parting comment is for Marcia. I started putting in the chat, it got too long. When I started the organization, I started with one central value, and that was love. And what I say to this day, 20 years later, is I have to love you and your family and your community as much as I love me and my family and my community. And I have to love people that I will never meet so much that and will may never, have never, and will never meet for generations to come, that I have to be willing to lend my voice and my energy to make sure this is a more humane society. And I have to do it through love. It starts and ends for me there. Everything else we can figure out. But if we don't have that, it doesn't matter what we do.
I always say I have friends I haven't even met yet. And I mean that.
Absolutely.
I can't wait, you know? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, ladies, thank you so much for a heartfelt presentation, giving us ideas. I did see in the chat that someone had a question that was recorded, and I think that we did touch base on it, but I will say what your question was. It says, these models are wonderful, but respectfully, Italy and Denmark have nationalized medicine. How could this be accomplished in an equitable way in the United States? We don't have time to answer that question today, but I think we spoke to it a little bit, and that we will send out some follow-up information to everyone. So thank you, ladies, for an amazing presentation. And let me stop my share because that is not what I need for you guys to see. So you guys know that the next steps will be that, of course, the link of the recording and the slides will be sent out to everyone in 3 to 5 business days. And we'll also have the slides. We have another event coming up next month, which is a presentation from the Center for Mental Health Implementation Support Team, and that will be June the 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Please, you'll see some information coming out for that to register. And last but not least, we always ask you, in order for us to bring you programming like this, we have to give SAMHSA feedback. So you can either scan a QR code so that you can go directly to the survey. If you don't scan this code, don't worry. When you close out of Zoom, it should take a page should come up for you to take the survey. After you take that survey, you should be directed to a certificate of completion. You have to download the certificate of completion. You can put your name in it, then you can print it out, save it to your files, do whatever you need. So again, we want to just thank you for taking the time out today to join us for the webinar, and join us again next month.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.